an exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. Pregnant and without hope, she made a desperate pact to marry a paralyzed millionaire to save her baby's life. But behind that alliance, dark secrets and a dangerous passion that could destroy everything. Watch this story until the end. You will be surprised by it. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The smell of cheap disinfectant and reheated coffee still clung to Hannah's clothes when she pushed through the revolving door of Northwestern Memorial Hospital for the last time. 5 months of pregnancy weighed not only on her rounded belly, but in every step she took across the cracked sidewalks of downtown Chicago. Morning sickness had given way to constant dizziness, that sensation of floating between the real and the impossible, as if life were a bad dream from which she couldn't awaken. December had arrived with its suffocating cold, and Hannah felt sweat beading on her neck as she walked along Lakeshore Drive. 37 degrees in the shade, and she was wearing the same flowery polyester blouse she'd worn for 3 straight days. The wheeled suitcase she dragged behind her made an irritating noise against the uneven asphalt, a sound that echoed her own situation, broken, misaligned, out of place. 3 weeks earlier, she still had a tiny apartment in Pilsen. 2 cramped rooms, the smell of fried food rising from the Chinese restaurant on the ground floor, a bathroom leak she could never fix. But it was hers, or rather it was Brian's, the boyfriend who had promised to stay by her side. Forever, my love, I swear, on my mother's life. The same Brian who disappeared one Thursday morning, taking the furniture, their joint savings, and leaving only a note stuck to the empty refrigerator. I can't do this, forgive me. Hannah laughed bitterly, remembering the naivety with which she'd read those words. Forgive what? The abandonment, the cowardice, or the fact that she, at 27, had been stupid enough to believe that a 42-year-old unemployed man with 2 children from previous relationships and a history of debt would be capable of taking responsibility for another child. The dismissal came 2 days later. Dr. Mitchell, the owner of the dental office where she worked, claimed cost-cutting and restructuring, but Hannah knew the truth. Pregnant women were trouble, maternity leave was expensive, and a single pregnant woman was even worse. She would be double the work because she wouldn't have a husband to help at home. It's a shame, Hannah. You were a good employee, he said, avoiding her eyes. But you understand, right? Tough times. She understood. She understood that she was alone in a world that had no patience for women like her. She understood that society spoke nicely about motherhood and family, but when push came to shove, a single mother without resources was just a problem to be ignored. Now, walking through the downtown streets, Hannah felt the weight of reality, falling on her like the heavy rain that threatened to pour down at any moment. Dark clouds gathered in the Chicago sky, promising a typical winter storm. She needed to find a place to spend the night. The city shelter was full. She had already tried the previous week. The few friends she had either no longer answered her messages or invented polite excuses to avoid getting involved. The pride she still had left screamed not to ask for help, not to humiliate herself, but when you're a pregnant woman, carrying life in a broken suitcase, pride becomes a luxury you cannot afford. She stopped in front of a newsstand and leafed through the classified pages. Apartments for rent, all too expensive. Jobs that required total availability, experience she didn't have, or simply wouldn't hire pregnant women. Even though it was illegal, everyone knew how it worked in practice. That's when she saw the headline. On the front page, Thomas Blackwood hospitalized after mysterious accident. The photo showed a man with angular features, dark hair slightly graying at the temples, penetrating eyes that seemed to pierce through the paper and fix directly on her. Hannah knew the name, like anyone who watched the news. Thomas Blackwood, founder of Terra Pharma, one of the country's largest pharmaceutical companies. Billionaire reclusive, known for his brilliant intelligence and difficult temperament. Another rich guy who got into trouble, muttered the newspaper vendor, noticing her interest. They say his helicopter crashed somewhere, but it's all very strange, you know. No one knows exactly what happened. Seems like something out of a movie. Hannah nodded distractedly, more concerned with her own personal tragedy than with a billionaire's problems. She put the newspaper away and continued, walking with no particular destination. The afternoon passed and Hannah found herself increasingly exhausted. Her swollen feet ached inside her simple shoes, and the false contractions, at least she hoped they were false, came more frequently. She sat on a bench in Grant Park, watching the constant movement of people, who all seemed to have a place to go, a purpose, an organized life. A pigeon landed near her feet, pecking at imaginary crumbs. Hannah laughed sadly. Even the pigeons in Chicago seemed smarter than her, always finding a way to survive on the streets. "At least you know how to fend for yourselves," she said to the bird, which completely ignored her. The sun was beginning to set when Hannah made a decision that would change her life forever. She would return to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, not as an employee, but as a patient. She would invent an emergency, a strong pain, anything that would make her spend the night in a safe and warm place. It was a pathetic lie, but it was all she had. The hospital at night had a different atmosphere, denser, more desperate. The corridors echoed with muffled groans, whispered conversations, and the constant noise of machines that kept lives suspended between existing and ceasing to exist. Hannah headed for the obstetric emergency room, mentally preparing the performance she would give. But it was there, in that moment of total vulnerability, that she saw him. He was being transferred from a private ambulance to a sophisticated, motorized wheelchair. Even in the dim light of the parking lot, Hannah immediately recognized the face she had seen in the newspaper. Thomas Blackwood. Only in person he was different from what the photos suggested, taller even sitting down, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare, and his eyes were like dark glass, not empty, but reflective, as if they held secrets that even he didn't fully understand. When his gaze met hers, Hannah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold Chicago night wind. The medical team accompanying him moved with the precision of a military operation. Doctors, nurses, security guards, all dressed in white, or black, all speaking in whispers, all avoiding looking directly at him, as if Thomas Blackwood were not just a patient, but a kind of dangerous phenomenon that needed to be contained. Hannah should have looked away, should have continued on. Her way entered the hospital, invented her medical emergency and forgotten that scene. But something in the way he observed her, with a mixture of curiosity and recognition, as if he knew her from some impossible place, made her stand there, holding the handle of the broken suitcase, feeling the baby move in her belly. He was taken to the private elevator, disappearing behind steel doors that closed with a definitive sound. But Hannah remained standing in the same place for long minutes, as if waiting for him to return. As if that silent encounter meant something. She couldn't explain what she felt at that moment. It wasn't pity. Thomas Blackwood didn't seem the type of man who aroused compassion. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the common sense of the word. It was something stranger, more disturbing. It was as if, for a few seconds, she had glimpsed a reflection of herself in those glass eyes, the same loneliness, the same despair disguised as control. Hannah finally entered the hospital, but her mind was divided. While waiting in line for care, inventing symptoms that seemed increasingly false as time passed, she found herself thinking about the man in the wheelchair, about the rumors surrounding his accident, about the way his medical team treated him. With fear or reverence, it was hard to tell. Next, called the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with the face of someone who had seen too much suffering for one lifetime. Hannah approached the counter, the words already prepared on her tongue. Strong abdominal pain, irregular contractions, history of pregnancy complications, lies that sounded convincing even to herself. But when she opened her mouth to speak, the words that came out were different. I wanted information about Thomas Blackwood. Was he admitted today? The receptionist looked at her suspiciously. Are you family? No, Hannah hesitated. I worked for him. I heard about the accident and came to see how he is. It was a pathetic lie, but it worked. The woman checked the computer and shook her head. He's on the 10th floor, private wing, but he's not receiving visitors. Doctor's orders. Hannah thanked her and moved away from the counter, not knowing exactly why she had lied or what she intended to do with that information. She sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair and stayed there, watching the movement of the hospital, lost in thoughts she couldn't organize. It was almost midnight when she saw the lawyer. He emerged from the elevator with the erect posture of someone accustomed to solving problems with money and influence. Dark suit, executive briefcase, grave expression. He approached her with the precision of someone who had been instructed on where to find her. "Hannah Sanders?" he asked, his deep voice echoing in the half-empty corridor. She nodded, too surprised to ask. How he knew her name. "My name is Robert Sanders, private attorney for Mr. Thomas Blackwood. He would like to speak with you." Hannah felt her heart accelerate. "Speak with me, but we don't even know each other. Mr. Blackwood asked me to locate you. He said he found you here earlier and became interested in your situation." Interested in her situation. The words sounded strange, loaded with meanings that Hannah couldn't decipher. She looked at her wrinkled clothes, at the broken suitcase at her feet, at her own reflection in the dark windows of the hospital. What could a billionaire want with a woman like her? "I don't understand," she said, her voice coming out weaker than intended. Robert Sanders sat in the chair next to her, lowering his voice. "Mr. Blackwood has a proposal to make to you, a proposal that could solve your current problems." Hannah laughed, a humorless sound. "How does he know what my problems are?" "Mr. Blackwood is a man of resources and observation." The lawyer opened his briefcase and removed a sheet of paper. "He knows that you are unemployed, homeless, 5 months pregnant, and without family support. He also knows that you have a degree in business administration, worked 3 years at Dr. Mitchell's office, and have a reputation for honesty and discretion." The words hit Hannah like punches, her entire life summarized on a sheet of paper, investigated and catalogued, like a business report. She felt naked, exposed, reduced to statistical data. "This is harassment," she said, trying to sound indignant, but her voice just came out tired. "It's an opportunity," corrected Robert. "Mr. Blackwood is in need of companionship, someone who can assist him during his recovery period, someone trustworthy." Hannah looked at him with disbelief. "Companionship?" Robert hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "Mr. Blackwood's accident was traumatic. He lost the ability to move from the neck down. He needs constant care, but also emotional stability. He believes you can provide that." "Why me?" The question came out before Hannah could think better of it. "Because you have something in common." Robert closed the briefcase and looked at her directly. "You both lost everything recently. The difference is that he has resources to rebuild. And he's willing to share those resources." Hannah felt a mixture of hope and terror growing in her chest. What exactly is he proposing? Marriage. The word fell between them like a stone thrown into a silent lake. Hannah blinked several times, trying to process what she had heard. "Marriage," she repeated, her voice almost inaudible. "A legal arrangement," Robert quickly explained. "A contract that would benefit both parties. You would receive financial stability, complete medical assistance for yourself and the child, secure housing. In exchange, you would provide companionship and care for Mr. Blackwood during his recovery period." Hannah stood up abruptly, the plastic chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. I don't sell myself." Robert remained seated, impassive. "You're not selling yourself. You're making a mutually beneficial agreement. A lonely man, a woman in difficulties, a practical solution to real problems. And if I say no, then you continue your life normally. No one will force you into anything." He paused. "But where will you sleep tonight, Hannah?" The question hit her like a slap. She looked around the hospital at the other patients waiting for care, at the security guards who were beginning to watch her with suspicion. Where would she sleep indeed? On the street? Under a viaduct? On a park bench? "How long?" she asked, hating herself for asking the question. The initial contract would be for 2 years, renewable if both parties agree. And after that? After that, you will be an independent woman, with your own resources to rebuild your life as you choose. Hannah sat down again, her legs trembling. The baby moved in her belly, as if sensing the mother's tension. She placed her hands on her rounded belly, thinking of the child she carried. A girl, according to the last ultrasound. A girl who would be born into a world where her mother had nothing to offer but love, and love didn't pay for diapers or rent. Can I think about it? Robert checked the expensive watch on his wrist. Mr. Blackwood will leave the hospital tomorrow morning. If you accept the proposal, the marriage will take place this week. All the documentation is already prepared. Already prepared? Hannah stared at him incredulously. You were sure I would accept? Not sure. Hopeful. Robert stood up, smoothing his suit. Hopelessness makes... Intelligent people make decisions they would normally consider unthinkable. But sometimes those decisions end up being the best they could have made. He handed her a card with an address handwritten on the back. If you decide to accept, appear at this address tomorrow at 10 in the morning. If you don't show up, we'll understand it's a no. Hannah was left alone in the corridor, holding the card as if it were a bomb about to explode. The hospital walls seemed to be closing in around her, and she found it difficult to breathe. Marriage to a stranger. Her paraplegic billionaire who had her entire life investigated. It was madness. It was also her only chance. She remained seated in that plastic chair until dawn, watching the hospital movement gradually decrease. Tired doctors passed by without looking at her. Patients' family members dozed in similar chairs. And there she was, a pregnant woman with nowhere to go, holding in her hands the most important decision of her life. When the first rays of sun began to enter through the windows, Hannah finally stood up. She picked up the broken suitcase, walked to the public bathroom, and looked at herself in the stained mirror. The pale face, the disheveled hair, the red eyes from tiredness. Was that what Thomas Blackwood had seen in her? Vulnerability, desperation, or something more? She splashed cold water on her face and made her decision. At 10 in the morning, she was at the door of the downtown courthouse, wearing the only clean clothes she had in her suitcase, holding an improvised bouquet of flowers she bought at a stoplight. When she saw the convoy of armored cars arriving, when she saw Thomas Blackwood being transferred from a special van to the motorized wheelchair, when their eyes met again through the darkened glass, Hannah knew her life would never be the same. For better or worse, she had made her choice, and he apparently had made his. The marriage lasted exactly 12 minutes. Hannah stood next to Thomas's wheelchair at the downtown courthouse, listening to the formal words of the justice of the peace mix with the noise of traffic coming from the street. The ceremony had the coldness of a commercial transaction, which technically was exactly what was happening. 2 witnesses she had never seen before, a discreet photographer who recorded everything for legal purposes, and Robert Sanders supervising every detail like the director of a theatrical play. Thomas didn't look her in the eye during the entire ceremony. He kept his face turned forward, neutral expression, as if he were in a particularly boring business meeting. Only when the judge asked if he accepted Hannah as his wife did he move his eyes toward her and say, through the voice synthesizer, that he controlled with imperceptible ocular movements, "I do." The artificial voice sounded metallic, without emotion, but Hannah felt a shiver run down her spine, not of romance or happiness, but of something more primitive. Fear, perhaps, or the awareness that she was crossing a line from which there would be no return. When her turn came, her voice came out lower than she intended. "I do." The judge declared them husband and wife, and Thomas for the first time smiled. It wasn't a warm or comforting smile. It was the kind of smile a predator displays before biting its prey. Hannah tried to convince herself she was imagining things, that the tension of the moment was making her mind create ghosts where none existed. But when he extended his hand to her, a hand that should have been paralyzed, Hannah felt his fingers lightly press hers. An almost imperceptible touch, but definitely intentional. She looked at him, surprised, but Thomas had already turned his face forward, as if nothing had happened. The trip to the mansion took an hour and 40 minutes. Chicago was left behind, as the convoy of armored cars followed the highway toward the mountains of Lake Geneva. Hannah traveled in an adapted limousine, seated next to Thomas's wheelchair, watching the urban landscape give way to green fields and rolling hills. Thomas remained silent during the entire journey, but Hannah felt the weight of his gaze upon her. When she risked looking back, he quickly averted his eyes, feigning interest in the landscape passing by the window. It was a strange game, this dance of furtive glances, and Hannah wondered if he regretted his decision or was simply studying her like a scientist studies an interesting specimen. The mansion appeared at the top of a hill, surrounded by a dense forest of pine trees. The main gate was an impressive work of engineering, brushed steel and bulletproof glass that opened automatically when the cars approached. There were no visible guard posts, but Hannah noticed the strategically positioned security cameras and the almost invisible electric fence that surrounded the entire property. "Welcome to your new home," said Thomas through the synthesizer, the first thing he had said since the courthouse. Home. The word sounded strange to Hannah's ears. That place didn't seem like a home, but rather a fortress, or a very well-decorated prison. The main building was an impressive architectural project, all glass and exposed concrete, integrated into the natural landscape in an almost organic way. Straight, modern lines that contrasted with the wild vegetation around it. Hannah counted at least 3 floors, plus structures that seemed to extend down the hill, as if most of the property were hidden underground. When she got out of the limousine, the first shock was the silence. After the constant chaos of Chicago, that absolute quietness was almost disturbing. There was no traffic noise, human voices, or horns, just the wind in the pine trees and in the distance, the sound of running water, probably a stream flowing down the mountains. The second shock was the cold. Even though it was December, the altitude and proximity to the forest made the temperature at least 10 degrees lower than in the city. Hannah pulled the thin coat around her body, feeling the baby move in her belly, as if also reacting to the change in environment. "The house has automatic climate control," explained Thomas, noticing her discomfort. "You'll get used to it." The main door opened before they reached it. A woman of about 50 was waiting at the entrance, wearing a discreet housekeeper's uniform. Grey hair tied in a bun, erect posture, neutral expression that revealed years of experience in not showing surprise or curiosity regarding her employers. "This is Martha," said Thomas. "She has been taking care of the house for 15 years. Martha, this is Hannah, my wife." The word wife sounded artificial coming from the synthesizer, but Martha merely nodded politely. "Welcome, Mrs. Hannah. I prepared the main bedroom according to Mr. Thomas's instructions." Hannah thanked her, still trying to process the dimension of the place. The entrance hall had a double-height ceiling with a Carrara marble staircase that curved elegantly up to the second floor. Works of art, she recognized a painting that seemed to be by a famous artist, decorated the white walls. Everything very clean, very sophisticated, very impersonal. Thomas approached a panel on the wall and touched the screen with his chin, the only movement he could make. Immediately, the lights adjusted, the temperature subtly changed, and Hannah heard an almost imperceptible hum coming from the walls. "Artificial intelligence," he explained, noticing her expression of curiosity. "The house responds to my ocular and voice commands. It made things much easier after the accident." Accident. Hannah noticed how he hesitated before using the word, as if it weren't exactly the correct description of what had happened. "Martha will show you to your quarters," continued Thomas. "We dine at 8. Until then, I suggest you rest and familiarize yourself with the environment." He moved away in the motorized wheelchair, following a corridor that led to what appeared to be a separate wing of the house. Hannah stood in the hall, suddenly aware that she was alone with the housekeeper in a place that seemed straight out of a science fiction movie. "Please, follow me," said Martha, climbing the marble staircase. The room that had been prepared for Hannah was on the second floor, with a view of the back gardens and the forest beyond. It was larger than the entire apartment she had shared with Brian. King-size bed, with what appeared to be expensive linens, integrated closet, bathroom with a soaking tub, and shower with multiple water outlets. Everything in neutral tones, white, beige, light grey. "Mr. Thomas asked me to make it clear that this is your private space," said Martha, opening the automatic curtains. "No one will enter here without your permission. The house has an internal communication system. Just touch any screen and ask for what you need." Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, testing the softness of the mattress. "And his room?" "Mr. Thomas has his quarters on the ground floor in the east wing, for accessibility reasons." Martha paused. "He also asked me to inform you that there are no conjugal expectations. This is an agreement of mutual convenience." The words brought a relief that Hannah didn't expect to feel, but also a strange pang of something she couldn't identify. Disappointment? Curiosity? It was ridiculous. She barely knew the man. "Are there other people living on the property?" asked Hannah. "Besides me, there's the gardener, who comes 3 times a week, and the cleaning team, who works during the day. At night, it's just the 3 of us." Martha hesitated. "And Mr. Thomas prefers privacy. He very rarely receives visitors." After the housekeeper left, Hannah explored the room in more detail. She opened the closet and found clothes in her size. All expensive, elegant, suitable for her pregnancy state. How had Thomas managed to know her exact sizes? Another demonstration of the resources that Robert Sanders had mentioned. On the dresser, she found personal hygiene products, makeup from brands she only knew from magazines, and even prenatal vitamins prescribed specifically for her stage of pregnancy. It was impressive and disturbing at the same time. Every detail had been planned, every need anticipated. Hannah took a long bath in the soaking tub, feeling her muscles relax in the warm water. For the first time in weeks, she didn't need to worry about the electricity bill or the duration of the bath. For the first time in months, she was in a warm, clean, safe place. She should be happy, or at least relieved. Instead, she felt like a doll in a very expensive dollhouse. She put on one of the dresses she found in the closet, a soft, knit model, wine-colored, that elegantly highlighted her rounded belly. When she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like a different woman, more sophisticated, more appropriate for that environment. She went down to dinner punctually at 8, finding Thomas already, positioned at the head of a mahogany table that could easily accommodate 12 people. He had exchanged the formal suit for more casual clothes, tailored pants, and a white linen shirt that enhanced the tan of his skin. "You look beautiful," he said when she approached, and for the first time the comment didn't come through the synthesizer. His natural voice was deep, slightly hoarse, with a Midwestern accent softened by years of refined education. Hannah stopped midway. "You can speak normally?" Thomas hesitated, as if he had revealed something he intended to keep secret. "Sometimes. When there are no other people around, the synthesizer is more practical." "More practical or safer?" Hannah sat in the chair that a discreet employee pulled out for her, observing Thomas with new eyes. If he could speak, what else could he do that he pretended not to be able to? Dinner was served in a silent ritual, employees who appeared and disappeared like ghosts, bringing plates that looked like works of art. Hannah, accustomed to deli sandwiches and ramen noodles, felt out of place amidst all that sophistication. "You're not eating," observed Thomas, noticing that she was just picking at the food on her plate. "I'm still getting used to it," she said. "It's all very different from what I'm used to." "And what are you used to?" The question caught Hannah off guard. She looked at him, trying to decipher if it was genuine curiosity or just social politeness. Small apartments, cut-off electricity, bills, instant noodles for breakfast, she shrugged. Real life. And this isn't real life. This is a fairy tale, and I've learned that fairy tales always have a price. Thomas smiled, a genuine smile this time, not that predatory smile from the courthouse. Intelligent and skeptical, good qualities. For what? For survival. The answer sent a chill down Hannah's spine. Survive what? The marriage, life in that house, Or something more specific that he wasn't saying? Why did you choose me? She asked, deciding to be direct. Of all the women in difficult situations in Chicago, why me? Thomas carefully set down his fork. He could move his arms, Hannah noticed, just with difficulty and limitation. Another inconsistency in the story of total paralysis. You have eyes that don't lie, he said finally. When I saw you at that hospital, I saw a woman who had lost everything but still hadn't given up. That's rare. And you need someone who doesn't give up? I need someone who doesn't pity me. Hannah studied his face. The well-drawn bones, the strong jaw, the dark eyes that seemed to hold much more than they revealed. Thomas Blackwood was a handsome man, no doubt. But there was something about him that went beyond physical appearance, an intensity that made her want to approach and flee at the same time. And what do I gain from this besides the obvious financial stability? She asked. Honesty. What do you mean? Thomas looked at her directly. I won't pretend to love you. I won't make romantic promises I can't keep. But I also won't lie to you. If you stay here, you'll know the truth about me. The whole truth. And if I don't like the truth? Then you're free to leave, with a generous settlement and no obligations. Hannah felt the baby move, as if reacting to the growing tension in the conversation. She placed her hand on her belly, thinking of the child who would be born in a few months. What kind of environment would this be to raise a daughter? May I ask some questions? She said. You may. How exactly was your accident? Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was lower, more controlled. Helicopter crashed in a densely wooded region near Aspen. I spent 6 hours trapped in the wreckage before rescue arrived. And the paralysis, trauma to the spinal cord, C4 and C5. He paused. Or at least that's what the doctors believe. Hannah caught the ambiguity in the response. You're not sure? Medicine isn't an exact science. Sometimes the body reacts in unexpected ways. Unexpected, like being able to move his fingers during a wedding ceremony, like being able to eat with relative autonomy. Hannah decided not to press the issue for now. Were you married before? The question seemed to hit him like a punch. Thomas looked away toward the window, where the darkness of the night transformed the glass into a mirror. Yes. What happened? She died. How? The silence stretched for so long that Hannah began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost inaudible. Suicide. Hannah felt her stomach contract. Thomas, No, he interrupted her. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it must have been difficult. Don't ask the obvious questions about guilt or responsibility. Just accept that it happened. They finished dinner in silence, but it wasn't a comfortable silence. It was loaded with unspoken tensions, with secrets that hung in the air like smoke. Hannah found herself observing Thomas eat, noticing every movement, every facial expression, trying to decipher the enigma that her life had become. When they rose from the table, Thomas said, Tomorrow Martha will show you the rest of the property. There's a library that might interest you, and a winter garden where you can spend your afternoons. And you? What do you do during the day? Work. Terra farmer. Doesn't run itself even with my current condition. Hannah nodded, but when she turned to go up the stairs, he called her. Hannah. She turned around. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For accepting the proposal, for being here, for not looking at me as if I were a cripple worthy of pity. The words touched something deep within Hannah. She descended a few steps, approaching him. Thomas, I don't know how this is going to work between us. I don't know if we'll be able to be whatever it is we are now, but I don't pity you. No? No. I fear you. He smiled, that enigmatic smile again. Good. Fear keeps people alert. That night, Hannah took a long time to fall asleep. The room was too comfortable, too quiet, too strange. She was used to urban noises, sirens, voices on the street, music from neighbors. Here the only sound was her own heart beating, and occasionally a groan from the house structure settling with temperature changes. Around midnight, she heard Footsteps in the corridor. Hannah got up slowly, walking to the door. She put her ear to the wood and clearly heard the sound of footsteps moving away. Slow footsteps, but definitely someone walking. Thomas? She opened the door carefully and peered into the corridor. It was empty, but a faint light came from the ground floor. Hannah descended the stairs barefoot, following the light. The light came from the library, a room she hadn't seen during the quick tour of the house. The shelves went from floor to ceiling, filled with books that looked old and valuable. A fireplace crackled softly, and in a leather armchair she saw Thomas. He was reading, not in the wheelchair, but sitting normally in the armchair, a book in his hands, reading glasses on his face. When he noticed her presence, he looked up and froze like an animal caught in a trap. "You can walk," said Hannah, not as a question, but as a statement. Thomas closed the book slowly and looked at her. "Yes." "Why the charade?" He got up from the armchair, a fluid, natural movement without any motor difficulty. Hannah instinctively stepped back, not out of physical fear, but from the awareness that everything she had believed in the last 24 hours was a lie. "It's complicated." Thomas approached her, and Hannah could see that he was taller than she had imagined. At least 6 feet, broad shoulders, still athletic physique, despite months of supposed immobility. "I have time," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. Thomas hesitated, as if weighing how much of the truth he could reveal. "The paralysis is psychological." "What do you mean?" "There's no real physical damage to my spinal cord. The accident happened, but the injuries weren't as severe as they claimed. The paralysis is an emotional response to trauma, conversion disorder, according to the psychiatrists." Hannah processed the information. "You can't walk because you don't want to be able to?" "More or less, it's involuntary most of the time. But here in this house, especially at night, I can move normally." "Why?" Thomas returned to the armchair but didn't sit. He rested his hands on the backrest, and Hannah noticed that he was trembling slightly. "Because at night, she isn't here." "She?" "Claire, my first wife." Hannah felt a chill in her stomach. "But you said she died." "I did, and she did die. But—" Thomas hesitated. "Sometimes I see her, during the day, in the corridors, in the gardens, especially in the room we shared. That's when the paralysis manifests most intensely." Hannah stared at him, trying to decide if he was delusional or if something more sinister was happening in that house. "Thomas, are you saying you see ghosts?" "I'm saying that Claire won't leave me in peace, and when she's around, my body reacts as if I were guilty of her death." "And are you?" The question came out before Hannah could think better of it. Thomas looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Pain, anger, guilt, all mixed together. "That's the $6 billion question, isn't it?" he said, with a humorless smile. Hannah approached him slowly. "Thomas, if you can walk, why continue pretending? Why not seek psychological help? Because as long as I'm a pitiful invalid, no one suspects that I might have killed my wife." The words fell between them like stones in a calm pool. Hannah felt her heart accelerate. "Did you kill her?" Thomas looked her in the eyes. "I don't know." "How can you not know?" "Because on the night Claire died, I was drunk, very drunk. We argued, she ran out to the garden, and when I woke up the next morning, they found her body at the foot of the cliff." Hannah sat in a nearby chair, her legs suddenly weak. "And you don't remember what happened?" "I remember fragments, argument, screams, her saying she was leaving, that she couldn't take it anymore, me shouting back, saying she couldn't leave. Me." Thomas ran his hands through his hair. "And then nothing, complete blackout until waking up the next morning." "What did the police conclude?" "Suicide. Claire had a history of depression, was taking heavy medications. The autopsy showed she had ingested a dangerous combination of anti-anxiety drugs and alcohol before she died. The body was at the foot of the cliff. Apparently she jumped." "But you think it might have been different?" Thomas sat in the armchair, again suddenly looking much older and tired. "Claire left me a letter. It said she couldn't live with me anymore, that my jealousy and possessiveness were killing her slowly, that she preferred to die than continue being my prisoner." Hannah absorbed the information in silence. "And that's why you feel guilty?" "Because even if she killed herself, I was the one who drove her to that point. My love for her was sick, suffocating. I transformed our home into a prison and myself into the jailer." They were silent for long minutes, only the sound of the fireplace crackling between them. Hannah observed Thomas, seeing him no longer as the mysterious billionaire who had married her, but as a man haunted by his own demons. "Why did you tell me this?" she finally asked. "Because you deserve to know who you married, and because, he hesitated, "because I'm afraid of doing the same thing to you." Hannah felt a shiver of fear and, strangely, excitement. "What do you mean?" Thomas looked at her directly. "I mean that since you stepped into this house, I'm already beginning to feel things I haven't felt in 2 years, and that scares me." "What kind of things?" He stood up and approached her slowly. Hannah didn't move, even when he stopped. Very close to the chair where she was sitting. Protection, possessiveness, desire. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You're pregnant with another man's child. I've barely known you for 2 days, but when I think of you leaving this house, of you going back to that life of misery in Chicago, something in me wants to ensure that never happens." Hannah swallowed hard. "Thomas, I know it's crazy. I know you must be thinking you married a madman. But I needed to be honest." Hannah stood up too, face to face with him. Even with the fear, even with all the disturbing revelations, she felt a magnetic attraction to this man. Perhaps it was the vulnerability he was showing. Perhaps it was the danger. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that for the first time in her life, someone wanted her so much that he was willing to confess his worst secrets. "What if I say, I don't want to leave?" she said, surprised by her own courage. Thomas looked at her as if she had said something in a foreign language. "Hannah, what if I say I'm also feeling things I shouldn't be feeling?" He extended his hand and touched her face gently. "Then, we're both lost." Hannah covered his hand with hers. "Maybe being lost isn't so bad." Thomas leaned in to kiss her, but stopped a few inches from her lips. "If you stay, you need to know that there will be no guarantees. I can protect you, I can give you everything you need materially, but I can't guarantee that I won't hurt you. And you need to know," said Hannah, "that I'm not a defenseless victim. I'm a woman who has been through a lot and is still standing. If you try to turn me into a prisoner, you'll find out. You chose the wrong person." He smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she had seen on him. "There, now we're understanding each other." And finally he kissed her. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, but soon deepened into an intensity. That surprised them both. Hannah felt Thomas's body pressed against hers, felt his hands on her waist, on her neck, in her hair. It was a kiss loaded with months of solitude, of repressed desire, of unmet emotional needs. When they separated, both were breathing with difficulty. "Hannah," said Thomas, his voice hoarse, "are you sure?" In response, she kissed him again, with even more intensity. His hands moved up her body, stopping respectfully when they found her rounded belly. "The baby," he murmured. "Is fine," said Hannah. "We're fine." Thomas picked her up in his arms, a gesture that should have been impossible for a paraplegic man, and carried her to the leather sofa near the fireplace. He laid her down carefully, kissing her neck, her shoulders, her hands. "You're beautiful," he whispered against her skin. "Since I saw you at that hospital, I can't think of anything else." Hannah felt her body react to his touch, his words, the unexpected intimacy of that moment. It was madness, she knew. She had known this man for 2 days, had just discovered that he might be a murderer, and yet there she was, giving herself to him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But perhaps it was exactly because of that. Because they were both broken people marked by life, and together they found a strange form of completeness. Thomas kissed her with a passion that bordered on desperation, and Hannah responded with equal intensity. They made love there, in the hardy library, with the fireplace crackling and the ancient books as silent witnesses, as if they were two castaways who had finally found solid ground. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Hannah felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. Thomas caressed her hair, watching the flames in the fireplace. "And now?" she asked. "Now you're part of this house, this life." "Me?" He looked into her eyes. "If you still want to be." Hannah kissed him softly. "I want to, but with one condition." "Which is?" "No more lies. If we're going to make this work, I need the truth. Always." Thomas nodded. "Truth always." But as Hannah fell asleep in his arms, he looked at the ceiling of the library, knowing there was one truth he still couldn't tell. At least not yet. The truth about what really happened on the night of Claire's death, and about the letters that continued to appear throughout the house, written in her handwriting. Hannah woke up alone in the library, covered by a cashmere blanket that wasn't there the night before. The fireplace had gone out during the early morning, leaving only cold ashes and the residual smell of burnt wood. Through the window, the first rays of sun filtered through the tops of the pine trees, creating golden patterns on the bookshelves. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. Thomas's confession about being able to walk, the revelations, about Claire, the intensity of what happened between them there on that leather sofa. But when she moved, she felt the delicious muscle soreness that confirmed nothing had been a product of her imagination. Thomas had disappeared, probably back to the wheelchair before anyone could see him walking. The paralysis theater needed to continue, at least during the day. Hannah got up slowly, adjusting her wrinkled dress. The baby moved in her belly, a gentle movement that made her smile. At 6 months pregnant, she felt more connected to the child each day. Sometimes she talked to her, especially in the hours of solitude, telling her about the strange life they had both gotten into. "Good morning, little one," she whispered, caressing her belly. "Your mommy has gotten herself into a complicated story, hasn't she?" She left the library and went up the stairs toward her room, hoping not to meet anyone along the way, but when she reached the second-floor corridor, she heard voices coming from the ground floor. Thomas was talking to someone, probably about business, judging by the formal tone she could pick up. In the bathroom, Hannah took a long shower, letting the hot water relieve the tension in her muscles. While soaping up, she thought about the night before. Thomas had proven to be a surprisingly careful lover, attentive to her needs and physical limitations because of the pregnancy. There was an intensity in him that bordered on obsession, but also a tenderness that had caught her off guard. But the revelations about Claire continued to echo in her mind. The first wife who died in suspicious circumstances, Thomas's unhealthy jealousy, the farewell letter talking about feeling like a prisoner. Hannah knew she should be afraid, should be questioning her decision to stay. Instead, she felt strangely excited by the complexity of the situation. Perhaps it was because she had her own demons too. She had also made bad choices, gotten involved with the wrong men, hurt people she loved. Thomas wasn't the only one in the relationship with a dark past. She wore a black knit, midi skirt and a long-sleeved cream blouse, clothes she found in the closet that fit her body perfectly. When she went down for breakfast, she found Thomas in the dining room, back in the wheelchair, talking with a man in a suit she didn't know. "Hannah," said Thomas when he saw her, using the voice synthesizer again. "I want to introduce Dr. James Silver, my personal physician." Dr. Silver was a middle-aged man, graying hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and a friendly professional expression. He stood up politely when Hannah approached. "Mrs. Blackwood, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thomas has told me a lot about you." Mrs. Blackwood. The name still sounded strange to Hannah's ears, as if it belonged to someone else, someone more sophisticated, more suitable for that world of wealth and privilege. "Dr. Silver came to do my monthly evaluation," explained Thomas, "and also to meet you. I heard you're expecting a baby. Congratulations." "Thank you," said Hannah, sitting at the table where Martha had prepared an elaborate breakfast. Fresh fruits, artisan breads, imported cheeses, natural juices, all very different from the black coffee and bread with margarine she was used to. "If I may ask," said Dr. Silver, "when is the due date?" "End of March," answered Hannah. "At least that's what the doctor at the health clinic estimated at the Hugh. Last consultation." Thomas and the doctor exchanged a look that Hannah couldn't interpret. "I would like to suggest that you have a more detailed prenatal care," said Dr. Silver. "I know an excellent obstetrician in Chicago. We can schedule an appointment for this week." "It's not necessary," said Hannah quickly. "The care I'm receiving is adequate." "Hannah," intervened Thomas, using his natural voice for a brief moment before returning to the synthesizer. "Now you have access to the best medical care. There's no reason not to take advantage of it." There was something in his insistence that bothered Hannah, a need to control even her medical care. She nodded to avoid an argument, but mentally noted that she would need to establish some boundaries. After breakfast, Dr. Silver left, and Thomas excused himself to answer some work calls. Hannah was left alone in the living room, admiring the view of the gardens through the panoramic windows. The property was even more impressive in daylight. Perfectly manicured lawns, flower beds in geometric patterns, a pool that seemed to naturally integrate into the landscape. "Would you like to get to know the house better?" asked Martha, appearing silently beside her. Hannah accepted the offer, curious to explore the place she now called home. The housekeeper guided her through rooms that seemed straight out of an architecture magazine: private cinema room, complete gym, climate-controlled wine cellar, office with a view of the mountains. All impeccable, all expensive, all slightly impersonal. It was when they reached the second floor that Hannah noticed the locked door. "And this room?" she asked, trying to turn the knob of a dark wooden door at the end of the corridor. Martha hesitated. "It was Mrs. Clare's room. Mr. Thomas preferred to keep it closed after the accident." "Can I see it?" "I don't have the key. Only Mr. Thomas has access." Hannah nodded, but her curiosity was piqued. What kind of secrets did Thomas keep in the first wife's room, and why couldn't he simply get rid of her things? The tour continued through the other rooms on the second floor. An intimate living room, a small office, two impeccably decorated guest rooms that seemed never to have been used. When they returned to the ground floor, Martha showed Hannah the gourmet kitchen and pantry, explaining the meal schedules and asking about her food preferences. "Martha," said Hannah when they were alone in the kitchen, "may I ask a question about Mrs. Clare?" The housekeeper became visibly uncomfortable. "What would you like to know?" "What was she like, as a person, I mean?" Martha busied herself organizing some utensils that were already perfectly organized. "She was a very beautiful woman, elegant, educated. But," Hannah sensed there was more to the answer, "but she was fragile. She always seemed very fragile to me, as if she carried a weight that no one else could see." "Were she and Thomas happy?" The question made Martha stop completely, what she was doing. She looked around as if checking if anyone might be listening. "In the beginning, yes, they loved each other very much. But with time," she hesitated. "Mr. Thomas can be very intense. He loved Mrs. Clare in a way that sometimes seemed suffocating." "Suffocating how?" "He didn't like her going out alone, questioned where she was, who she talked to, installed cameras throughout the entire house, said it was for security, but—" Martha shook her head. "Mrs. Clare began to become increasingly isolated, depressed." Hannah felt a chill in her stomach. "And do you think that contributed to what happened?" "It's not for me to judge," said Martha quickly, "but I can say that in the last months before the accident, Mrs. Clare seemed like a shadow of her former self, and Mr. Thomas, he changed too, became more controlling, more possessive." The conversation was interrupted by Thomas's arrival, who entered the kitchen with the motorized wheelchair. "Are the ladies conspiring?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes alert. "Martha was showing me the kitchen," said Hannah quickly, "and telling me about the house routines." Thomas nodded, but Hannah noticed how his gaze remained fixed on the housekeeper for a moment, longer than necessary, a silent warning perhaps. "Hannah, would you like to have lunch in the winter garden? It's one of the most beautiful places on the property." She agreed, and Martha withdrew to prepare the meal. Thomas guided Hannah through a glass corridor that connected the main house to an annex structure. The winter garden was truly impressive, a gigantic greenhouse with tropical plants, water fountains, and a glass roof that allowed natural light. "To enter." "Claire adored this place," said Thomas, watching Hannah admire the orchids. "She spent hours here tending to the plants, reading, painting." "She painted?" "Watercolors. She had talent for it." Thomas indicated some framed canvases. "On the walls. These are her works." Hannah examined the paintings. They were mainly landscapes of the property, but all had a melancholic tone, a sadness that showed through in the chosen colors and the way the light was portrayed. "They're beautiful," she said, though she found the works disturbingly somber. "Claire saw the world differently in the later times," said Thomas, a note of sadness in his synthesized voice. Everything had a darker tone for her. They lunched at a small table surrounded by plants, the soft sound of running water creating an almost magical atmosphere. Thomas had returned to using his natural voice, and Hannah noticed how different he was when he didn't need to maintain the paralysis facade. More relaxed, more present, more himself. "About last night," he said suddenly. Hannah almost choked on the orange juice. "What about it?" "I don't want you to think it was just impulse or loneliness." He looked at her directly. "There's something about you that attracts me in a way I haven't been able to feel for anyone since Claire." "Thomas, let me finish." He extended his hand across the table and touched hers. "I know our situation is strange. I know I have problems, that my past is complicated, but I want to try to build something real with you. If you want that." Hannah intertwined her fingers with his. "I want that, but I need you to be honest with me. Always." "Always," he promised. But even as he said it, Hannah noticed how his eyes drifted for a moment to Claire's paintings on the wall. As if there were secrets he still wasn't ready to share. In the afternoon, Thomas had to leave for a meeting at the company. Hannah was left alone on the property for the first time, free to explore without supervision. She decided to return to the second floor and investigate more about Claire's locked room. The door remained closed, but Hannah noticed there was a gap at the bottom. She knelt down and managed to see a piece of the interior. Furniture covered with white sheets, closed curtains, an atmosphere of abandonment and melancholy. That's when she saw the envelope. It was on the floor, partially hidden under the door, as if someone had slid it underneath. Hannah carefully pulled it out. It was a cream paper envelope, no address, just her name written in elegant cursive. Hannah. With her heart beating rapidly, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message. "He did to me what he's doing to you. Beware of how he loves. See." Hannah reread the message several times, her hands trembling. The handwriting was feminine, delicate, but there was an urgency in the words that frightened her. C for Claire, but that was impossible. Claire had been dead for 2 years. She put the letter in her pocket and quickly went down the stairs looking for Martha. She found the housekeeper in the laundry room, folding bed linens. "Martha, does anyone else have access to the house during the day?" The housekeeper seemed surprised by the question. "Just the gardener, and he only comes on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays." "Why do you ask?" Hannah hesitated. Should she show the letter, or would it be better to investigate on her own first? Nothing important, just curiosity. But when she returned to her room, Hannah found another surprise. On her bed, there was another envelope. This one carried a different message. "He installed cameras in all the rooms, even in the bathroom. You have no privacy here. See." Hannah looked around the room with different eyes. Where would the cameras be? How had she not noticed before? She began to examine every corner, every piece of furniture, looking for lenses or surveillance equipment. It was in the bathroom mirror that she found it. A small camera disguised in the frame, almost invisible but definitely there. She felt violated, exposed, furious. Thomas was watching her without her consent, invading even her most intimate moments. She returned to the bedroom and conducted a more systematic search. She found 2 more cameras, one disguised in a picture frame on the wall and another in a lamp. There were probably more that she couldn't detect. She sat on the bed, the 2 letters in hand, trying to process what she was discovering. Thomas had lied to her, not just about the paralysis, but about respecting her private space. He was constantly watching her, just as he had done with Claire. And the letters, where were they coming from? Someone had access to the house and was trying to warn her about something. But who? And why? She heard the sound of cars arriving on the access road. Thomas was returning. Hannah put the letters in a drawer and tried to compose a normal expression, but her heart was racing. When Thomas entered the living room using the wheelchair again, Hannah was seated on the sofa, pretending to read a magazine. "How was your afternoon?" he asked, approaching her. "Quiet. I explored the house a bit, rested." She forced a smile. "And you, how was the meeting?" "Productive. We're developing a new medication for depression that could revolutionize treatment." He positioned himself next to the sofa. "Hannah, I need to travel to Chicago tomorrow. Some meetings I can't do by video conference." "That's fine. I'll stay. Here." "Actually," said Thomas, "I thought you might come with me. We could take advantage of it to have that consultation with the obstetrician that Dr. Silva suggested." Hannah felt an alarm go off in her mind. He wanted to take her away from the house, away from whoever was leaving the letters. "I prefer to stay," she said. "I'm still getting used to this place. I don't want to leave so soon." Thomas studied her carefully. "Are you sure? Chicago has great restaurants, shopping centers. We could spend a few days at the company apartment, I'm sure." He nodded, but Hannah noticed tension in his expression. "All right, but I promise I won't be gone more than 2 days." That night, during dinner, Hannah observed Thomas with different eyes. She noticed how he asked seemingly casual questions about how she had spent the day, who she had talked to, what she had done. She noticed how his eyes constantly followed her, as if he were mentally cataloguing her. "Thomas," she said suddenly, "why did you install cameras in all the rooms of the house?" The question caught him off guard. He stopped eating and stared at her. "Security," he said simply. "Security against what? We're in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests. There are always risks. People who might want to harm the Blackwood family. Even in the bedrooms, in the bathrooms." Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was lower, more controlled. "How did you know about the cameras?" "It's not hard to discover when you know where to look." Leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Are you bothered by this?" "Any person would be. It's an invasion of privacy." "It's protection," he corrected, "and monitoring. I need to know that you're safe. Or you need to control me." The words fell between them like a bomb. Thomas remained motionless, and Hannah saw something dangerous gleam in his eyes. "Claire said the same thing," he said finally, "and maybe she was right." Thomas stood up from the wheelchair, a movement that should be impossible, but which he did without thinking. He approached Hannah with slow, deliberate steps. "Hannah, you don't understand the risks. You don't understand what can happen when I'm not around to protect you." "What risks? What are you talking about?" He stopped right in front of her, his hands resting on the table. Claire thought she could go out alone, thought she could make her own decisions and see what happened. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you." His voice was loaded with an intensity that scared her. "You are mine now, Hannah. My wife. My responsibility. And I will not allow what happened to Claire to happen to you." Hannah stood up too, facing him. "And what exactly happened to Claire?" Thomas was silent, but his eyes said everything. There was anger there, possessiveness, obsession, and something darker that Hannah couldn't identify. "She tried to leave me," he said finally. "And I couldn't allow that." "Why not?" "Because when you truly love someone, you can't simply let them go away. You have to protect them, even from themselves." Hannah took a step back. "Thomas, that's not love. That's obsession." "Maybe," he said, approaching again, "but it's the only kind of love I know how to offer." He extended his hand and touched her face softly. Hannah should have stepped away, should have run. Instead, she felt attracted to his intensity, to the dangerous passion that emanated from his eyes. "Hannah," he whispered, "promise you won't try to leave me." She should have said no, should have maintained her independence, established clear boundaries. Instead, she heard herself saying, "I promise." And when he kissed her, with a passion that bordered on violence, Hannah gave herself completely, even knowing she was losing herself in the same labyrinth that had destroyed Claire. That night, they made love with an intensity that surprised them both. Thomas was possessive, dominating, but also incredibly attentive to her needs. Every touch, every kiss, every movement seemed to mark territory, as if he were engraving on her skin that she belonged to him. And Hannah, as much as she knew she should resist, discovered that she liked that feeling of being desired so intensely. After years of being ignored or abandoned by men, having someone who wanted her with such passion was addictive. When Thomas finally fell asleep beside her, Hannah lay awake looking at the ceiling. The baby moved constantly in her belly, as if sensing the mother's tension. She caressed her belly gently, whispering words of reassurance to the child. That's when she heard the footsteps. They were light, feminine steps, coming from the corridor. Hannah carefully got up without waking Thomas and went to the door. She opened it slightly and peered out. A female figure was walking down the corridor toward Claire's locked room. She was tall, elegant, with long hair and a white dress that seemed to float around her body. When she reached the door of the room, the figure turned and looked directly at Hannah. The face was beautiful, aristocratic, but there was a deep sadness in the eyes. The woman moved her lips as if trying to say something, but no sound came out. Hannah blinked and the figure disappeared. When she returned to the bed, Thomas was awake, watching her. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice tense. "Nothing," lied Hannah. "I thought I heard a noise." But he didn't seem to believe her. He spent the rest of the night awake, vigilant, as if expecting something terrible to happen. And perhaps he was right. The next morning, Thomas left for Chicago as planned. Hannah accompanied him to the cars, where he gave her a long and intense kiss. "Remember what you promised," he whispered in her ear. "I'll remember," she said, but when the cars disappeared down the road, Hannah ran back to the house. She had 2 days to discover the truth about Claire, 2 days to understand the mysterious letters, 2 days to decide if she wanted to continue in that life or if there was still time to escape. What she didn't know was that Thomas had left very specific instructions for Martha, instructions about not letting Hannah leave the property alone, about monitoring her every movement, and about calling immediately if anything unusual happened, because Thomas Blackwood had learned from Claire that women in love can be unpredictable, and this time he would not make the same mistakes. The first day without Thomas passed with torturous slowness. Hannah woke up alone in the king-size bed, with the strange impression that she had slept under constant surveillance. Even knowing he was miles away in Chicago, she felt the weight of his presence in every corner of the house. The hidden cameras seemed to follow her like invisible eyes, recording every movement, every expression. During breakfast, Martha was more taciturn than normal. She answered Hannah's questions with monosyllables, avoided eye contact, seemed constantly nervous. When Hannah suggested taking a walk in the external gardens, the housekeeper invented excuses about the unstable weather and insisted that she stay inside the house. "Mr. Thomas left specific instructions about your safety," said Martha compulsively, organizing the already organized kitchen utensils. "What kind of instructions?" asked Hannah, already suspecting the answer. "To ensure that you don't overexert yourself. Pregnancy requires special care." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Thomas had left orders that Hannah not leave the property. She was being kept prisoner, disguised as medical care, but if she couldn't leave, at least she could investigate. Hannah spent the morning systematically exploring each room of the house, looking for clues about Claire, about Thomas's past, about anything that might explain the growing sense of danger she felt. In the library, she leafed through books looking for notes or hidden letters. In Thomas's office, she tried to open drawers and files, but everything was locked with electronic locks that required passwords or biometric recognition. It was in the winter garden that she found the first real clue. She was admiring Claire's watercolors on the walls when she noticed something strange in one of the frames. The lower part was slightly loose, as if someone had opened it recently. Hannah looked around to make sure she was alone, then carefully removed the canvas from the frame. Behind the watercolor, glued to the back of the frame, was a sealed envelope. Inside, she found several sheets of paper covered with the same elegant handwriting as the letters she had received the day before. It was Claire's diary. The first pages dated from 3 years earlier, when Claire had married Thomas. The initial words were full of love and hope. Thomas is everything I've ever dreamed of in a husband. Intelligent, successful, passionate. He loves me with an intensity that sometimes scares me, but in a good way, as if I were the most precious thing in the world to him. But as Hannah continued reading, the tone gradually changed. Thomas installed security cameras throughout the house. He says it's for our protection, but sometimes I feel like I'm being constantly watched. I can't even take a bath without the feeling of being observed. He doesn't like when I go out alone. He always finds an excuse for me to be accompanied, or for me not to go. He says Chicago is dangerous, that people might want to kidnap me because of the family money. I'm beginning to feel like a prisoner of my own life. I discovered that Thomas hired a private detective to follow me. When I confronted him about it, he said it was just a precaution, that he loves me too much to take risks. But love shouldn't be a prison, should it? Hannah felt her heart accelerate. It was exactly what she was beginning to feel. The excessive protection, the constant surveillance, the feeling of having every movement monitored. The following pages became progressively more desperate. Thomas started controlling my finances. He says it's to better organize our expenses, but now I need to ask permission to buy anything. I no longer have access to my own credit cards. He reads my emails. I found the history of conversations on his computer. When I asked about it, he denied it, but I know it's true. I no longer have any privacy. The medications that Dr. Silva prescribed for anxiety are making me feel strange. Sometimes I don't remember what I did during the entire day. Thomas says it's normal that I need to rest more, but I'm afraid I'm losing my sanity. Hannah stopped reading, her hands trembling. Dr. Silva, the same doctor who had suggested she have consultations in Chicago, the same one Thomas seemed to blindly trust. She continued reading the last entries of the diary. I tried to call my sister on the phone, but the call was interrupted. Thomas said it was a line problem, but I suspect he blocked the number. I'm completely isolated from the outside world. I found documents in Thomas's office. There's a life insurance policy in my name worth $50 million. When I asked about it, he said it's standard procedure for rich people. But why so much money? And why didn't I know about it? I'm sure Thomas is putting something in my food. The medications I take are just for anxiety, but sometimes I feel completely drugged. I'm going to stop taking everything and see if I improve. I discovered the truth. Thomas is not just controlling, he's dangerous. I found files on his computer about the first wife. Yes, first wife. He was married before me. She also died in an accident. She also had a high life insurance policy. She had also started to question his behavior. Hannah stopped breathing. First wife. Thomas had been married before Claire. How many women had passed through that house? How many had died in suspicious circumstances? The last entry was from a week before Claire's death. I'm going to try to escape tonight. I managed to hide some money and have the documents hidden in the winter garden. If something happens to me, if I disappear or die, I want them to know it wasn't suicide. Thomas is a psychopath. He kills his wives when they discover the truth or try to leave him. I don't know how many came before me, but I can't let others come after. If anyone finds this diary, please stop him before he kills again. Hannah let the pages fall to the floor, her heart beating so hard she felt pain in her chest. Thomas wasn't just a controlling man with abandonment problems. He was a serial killer, a man who attracted vulnerable women, married them, isolated and controlled them until they discovered the truth, and then eliminated them to get the insurance money. And she had walked right into the trap. The baby moved violently in her belly, as if sensing the mother's panic. Hannah instinctively caressed her belly, trying to calm herself. She needed to think clearly. She needed to find a way to get out of there before Thomas returned. But first, she needed more information. She carefully saved Claire's diary and returned to the main house. Martha was in the living room folding bed linens but seemed agitated. "Martha," said Hannah, trying to keep her voice calm, "may I ask some questions about the Blackwood family?" The housekeeper looked around nervously. "What kind of questions?" "Was Thomas married before Claire?" Martha went pale. "I don't know if I should talk about that." "Please," insisted Hannah. "I need to know. It's important." Martha hesitated for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Yes, there was Camilla before Mrs. Clare." "What happened to her?" "Died in a car accident. Very tragic. Mr. Thomas was devastated." "And before Camilla?" "Rachel. Drowning in the pool." Martha was visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hannah, why these questions?" Hannah felt the world spin around her. 3 dead wives, all in accidents, and now she was the 4th. "Martha, I need to get out of here now." "I can't allow that," said Martha quickly. "Mr. Thomas left specific orders." "Mr. Thomas is her murderer," exploded Hannah. "He killed all his previous wives, and now he's going to kill me too." Martha recoiled as if she had been slapped. That's impossible. Mr. Thomas isn't... He wouldn't." "He would, and he did," said Hannah, taking Claire's diary from her pocket. "It's all here. Claire discovered about the other wives. She tried to escape, and he killed her." Martha looked at the diary with growing horror. "Where did you find this?" "Hidden in the winter garden. Claire left it so someone would discover the truth." Martha sat heavily in a chair, her hands trembling. "I always knew something was wrong. The other ladies, they became different before they died, scared, paranoid. I thought it was coincidence, but—" "Help me get out of here," implored Hannah. "Please, I don't want to die like them." Martha looked at her for a long moment, conflict evident on her face. "I can't. If Mr. Thomas discovers that I helped you escape, what will he do? Kill you too?" Martha's silence was answer enough. "My God," whispered Hannah. "You've been afraid of him for years, haven't you? That's why you never questioned anything. That's why you always obeyed everything." "He pays very well," said Martha weakly, "and I have a family to support." "And how many women have you seen die in silence because of that money?" Martha began to cry. "I didn't know. Wasn't sure. Always thought they were really accidents." Hannah approached and took the housekeeper's hands. "It's not too late. We can stop this now. Help me get out, and then we call the police." Martha vigorously shook her head. "The police won't believe it. Mr. Thomas has too much influence, too. Much money. And there's no real proof. Just coincidences and suspicions." She was right, Hannah realized. Claire's diary was evidence but not proof of murder, and Thomas certainly had enough connections to silence any investigation. "Then what do you suggest?" asked Hannah, desperate. "That you continue pretending you don't know anything, that you be an obedient wife until he kills me too?" Martha didn't answer, but the answer was clear in her eyes. Hannah stood up, determined. "No, I won't accept that. I'll find a way to get out of here." "How?" asked Martha. "He has surveillance on the entire property, security guards making rounds, and even if you managed to get out, where would you go? You have no money, no documents. You're 6 months pregnant." It was true Hannah was completely dependent on Thomas. He had made sure of that from the first day. "There has to be a way," she muttered. That's when she heard the sound of cars on the access road. Thomas was returning, 1 day earlier than expected. Martha went pale. "He can't know that we talked about this. If he finds out—" Hannah nodded, quickly hiding the diary. "I won't tell, but I won't give up either." They separated quickly, Martha returning to her domestic tasks and Hannah going up to her room to compose herself. When Thomas entered the house, she was in the living room, pretending to read a magazine. "Hannah," he said, entering with the wheelchair, but she noticed that he seemed more tense than usual. "I missed you." "I missed you too," she lied, forcing a smile. Thomas approached and kissed her, but the kiss was different, more possessive, more investigative, as if he were testing her. "How did you spend these 2 days?" he asked. "Quietly. I rested, talked a little with Martha." Hannah kept her voice casual. And you? I thought you would stay until tomorrow. I finished business earlier than expected, and I wanted to return to my wife. His eyes studied her intensely. Martha said that you asked many questions about the family. Hannah felt her blood freeze. Martha had told him about her questions. Of course she had. She worked for Thomas, not for Hannah. Just normal curiosity, said Hannah, trying to stay calm. I wanted to know more about your history. And what kind of history interests you? It was a loaded question. Thomas knew that she knew something, or at least suspected. The usual, how you built your company, how you met Claire, that kind of thing. Thomas nodded slowly. Claire, do you think about her a lot? Sometimes. It's natural, isn't it? Living in the house where she lived, sleeping in the same room. Actually, said Thomas, you don't sleep in the same room as Claire. Her room is at the end of the corridor. It's still sealed. Hannah felt a wave of panic. She had made a mistake. How did she know Claire had slept in that room if she had never been there? Martha mentioned it, she said quickly. Mentioned it. Thomas repeated the word as if he were testing its flavor. And what else did Martha mention? Hannah realized she was being tested. Thomas had returned specifically because he suspected something. Perhaps he had reviewed the recordings from the security cameras. Perhaps he had seen her exploring the house looking for clues. Nothing much, she said. Casual conversations. Thomas rose from the wheelchair, a movement that still surprised her even knowing he could walk. He approached her with slow, deliberate steps. Hannah, do you trust me? The question was a trap. Any answer could be dangerous. Of course. I trust you, she said. Then why did you lie to me? Hannah felt her heart stop. What do you mean? Thomas took something from his pocket. It was a printed photograph from a security camera, showing Hannah in the winter garden removing the watercolor from the frame. The cameras capture everything, he said calmly, including your little archaeological expeditions. Hannah tried to think of an excuse, but her mind was blank. She had been caught red-handed. I found something interesting behind that painting, said Thomas, taking another object from his pocket. Claire's diary. Recognize this? Hannah didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Claire was always dramatic, continued Thomas, leafing through the pages. Always inventing conspiracy theories about me. Paranoia is a common symptom of severe anxiety, did you know? It wasn't paranoia, said Hannah, finally finding her voice. It was the truth. Thomas smiled, that predatory smile again. Truth? And what is the truth in your opinion? Hannah stood up, facing him. There was no longer any reason to pretend. The truth is that you killed Claire, and Camilla, and Rachel. How many others, Thomas? How many women have died in this house? None, he said calmly. They all died outside the house. Accidents happen when people make reckless choices. The casual admission, the total lack of remorse, sent a chill down Hannah's spine. You're a monster, she whispered. I'm a man who loves too intensely, he corrected. And when the women I love try to leave me, I need to take measures to protect them, even if it's from themselves. Protect them? You killed them. I saved them from a life of misery and regret. Claire was hysterical that night, threatening to leave me, saying she would tell lies about me to the police. She was clearly disturbed. What happened was a merciful intervention. Hannah backed away, horrified by the coldness with which he spoke. And me? Will I also need to be saved? Thomas approached her again. That depends on you. If you're a good wife, if you accept the love I have to offer, you can live a long and comfortable life. But if you try to leave me, if you try to harm me, he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The threat was clear. I can't live like this, said Hannah, as a prisoner. It's not prison, it's protection, it's love. This isn't love. Then teach me, said Thomas, his voice suddenly vulnerable. Teach me how to love in a way that doesn't destroy. Because I've tried, Hannah. With all of them, I tried to be different. But the same thing always happens. They start to question, to doubt, to want freedom. And I can't give freedom to someone I love. I can't let them go away. Hannah saw tears in his eyes and felt a pang of what could be compassion, but she quickly pushed it away. Thomas might be a disturbed man, traumatized, unable to love normally. But he was also a murderer, and she needed to survive. "Thomas," she said carefully, "what if I promise that I won't try to leave you? If I promise that we'll find a way to make this work?" He studied her intensely. "Do you promise?" "I promise, but you need to trust me. You need to give me space to breathe, to be myself. Otherwise, you'll end up losing me anyway." Thomas nodded. Slowly. "You're right. Maybe I was too protective with the others. Maybe you're different, stronger." "I am," said Hannah. "But strength doesn't mean I don't need freedom." "What kind of freedom?" "Being able to leave the property occasionally, having real privacy in my quarters, being able to talk to other people without being monitored." Thomas considered the conditions. "I can accept some concessions, but there are limits, and there are consequences for breaking trust." "What do you mean?" "I want to have a child with you," he said suddenly. "I want the baby you're carrying to be officially mine, and I want us to have other children together." Hannah felt a chill in her stomach. "Thomas, children create bonds. They make women think twice before trying to leave the father." His eyes gleamed with a dangerous intensity. "It's a guarantee that you will always return home. And if I don't want more children, then we'll have a problem." The threat was clear. Hannah nodded, pretending to agree, but mentally she was already planning her escape. She needed to get out of there before Thomas discovered a way to make her prison even more inescapable. "All right," she said. "We can talk about children. In the future." Thomas smiled and kissed her softly. "I knew you were special. I knew you would be different from the others." But as he kissed her, Hannah could feel Claire's presence in the house, not as a ghost or apparition, but as a warning. A constant reminder that women who tried to trust Thomas Blackwood ended up dead. And Hannah was determined not to become another statistic. That night, Thomas made love to her with a passion that bordered on violence. He was possessive, dominating, almost desperate in his need to mark her as his property. Hannah pretended to respond with equal passion, but mentally she was disconnecting, planning, calculating. Afterward, when Thomas fell asleep beside her, she lay awake looking at the ceiling. The baby moved constantly as if sensing the mother's tension. Hannah caressed her belly, whispering silent promises to the child. "We're going to get out of here," she promised softly. "Mommy will find a way to keep us safe." But how? Thomas controlled everything, the money, the cars, the security, even the people around her. She was isolated on a property in the middle of nowhere, 6 months pregnant, without documents or resources of her own. That's when she remembered something. When Thomas had removed the diary from the watercolor, she noticed there were more papers behind the frame, papers he hadn't seen because he was focused on the diary. Claire had hidden more things in the winter garden. Hannah needed to return there and discover what else the first wife had left behind. Maybe there was a clue about how to escape, or maybe enough evidence to finally prove Thomas's crimes. But first, she needed to wait for him to fall into a deep sleep, and then the fight for her life would begin. Because one thing Hannah had learned in those days at the Blackwood mansion, Thomas might be an experienced predator, but she would not be easy prey. She would fight. For herself, for her baby, and for the women who came before her. The war had begun. Hannah counted every second that passed until Thomas fell into a deep sleep. 3 hours and 42 minutes of pretending to be the submissive wife he desired, responding to his caresses with simulated passion, whispering words of love that burned her throat like poison. When she finally heard his breathing becoming regular and deep, she waited another 30 minutes to be absolutely certain. The digital clock on the nightstand marked 2:15 in the morning when Hannah finally got up from the bed. Each movement was calculated, each step planned to make no noise. The noble wood floor was her ally. Unlike common flooring that creaked, those expensive boards were installed with precision and remained silent even under pressure. She put on the silk robe she found in the closet, another of the expensive clothes Thomas had provided for her, and descended the stairs like a ghost. The house was plunged into almost total darkness, only the security systems blinking softly in the corridors, constantly reminding her that every movement was being recorded. But Hannah had learned something important in the last few days. Thomas reviewed the recordings only when something aroused his suspicion. Her submissive behavior the night before had apparently reassured him. He believed she had accepted the situation, that fear had tamed her, as had happened with the others. How wrong he was. The winter garden was in a separate wing of the house, connected by a glass corridor that offered a panoramic view of the external gardens. During the day, it was one of the most beautiful places on the property. At night, it transformed into a somber greenhouse where the plants seemed like sleeping creatures and shadows danced like restless spirits. Hannah arrived at the watercolor she had investigated the day before. Thomas had put the frame back in place, but she noticed he hadn't nailed it again with the same care. When she carefully removed the canvas, she found exactly what she expected: more papers hidden by Claire. This time it wasn't a diary. It was a folder of carefully folded documents protected by plastic. Hannah took everything near one of the water fountains, where the soft light of the night irrigation system allowed her to read without turning on any lamps. The first document made her gasp in surprise. It was a birth certificate. Claire Smith. Blackwood had had a child, a boy named Gabriel, born 8 months before her death. Hannah reread the document 3 times, trying to process the information. Claire had become pregnant by Thomas. She had given birth to a child. But where was the baby? Thomas had never mentioned a child, and there were certainly no signs of a child in the house. The second document was even more shocking. A death certificate for Gabriel Smith Blackwood, at just 3 months of age. Cause of death: sudden infant death syndrome. Hannah felt nausea rising in her throat. Had Thomas killed his own child? Or had it really been a natural death that contributed to Claire's deteriorated mental state? She continued reading the documents with growing horror. There were copies of medical records showing that Claire had been hospitalized several times for psychotic episodes after the baby's death. Prescriptions for antipsychotic medications in doses that seemed extremely high. And reports from a private psychiatrist, the same Dr. Silver that Hannah had met, describing Claire as dangerous to herself and others. But the most revealing document was at the end of the folder. A letter written by Claire herself, with trembling but determined handwriting, addressed to the State Attorney General's office. "My name is Claire Smith Blackwood, and I am writing this letter because I believe my husband, Thomas Blackwood, killed our son Gabriel. I don't have physical evidence, only suspicions based on his behavior and discoveries I've made about his previous wives. Thomas is a dangerous man who uses his wealth and influence to cover up crimes. If something happens to me, please investigate my death carefully. It won't be suicide, no matter how it appears. It will be murder." The letter was dated 3 days before Claire's death. Hannah held the document with trembling hands, finally understanding the extent of Thomas's monstrosity. He hadn't just killed his wives. He had killed his own child when the baby became a nuisance, or when Claire began to suspect him. And now she was 6 months pregnant. The baby moved violently in her belly, as if sensing the mother's panic. Hannah instinctively caressed her belly, whispering words of reassurance that she herself didn't feel. "Calm down, little one. Mommy will get us both out of here." But how? She was trapped on an isolated property, without access to vehicles, without money, pregnant and vulnerable. Thomas controlled every aspect of her life, and now he knew that she had discovered the truth. That's when she found the last item in Claire's folder, a hand-drawn map of the property, showing not just the gardens and main buildings, but also trails in the forest that surrounded the mansion. One of the trails was marked with an arrow, and the annotation, "Rural Road, 2 miles, retired caretaker's house." Claire had found an escape route. Hannah studied the map carefully, memorizing every detail. The trail began behind the powerhouse, followed through an area of dense forest, and ended at a secondary road where there was an abandoned house. From there, theoretically, it would be possible to ask for help, or at least reach a main road. 2 miles. For a woman 6 months pregnant on irregular terrain, it would be a challenging walk, but not impossible. Hannah carefully folded the documents and hid them inside the robe. She needed to keep them in a safe place and prepare for the escape. But first, there was something else she needed to do. She needed to discover what had happened to Gabriel. The east wing of the house, where Thomas's quarters were, was dark and silent. Hannah knew the layout of the house well enough to move without difficulty, avoiding the rooms with more sensitive motion sensors. Thomas's office was at the end of the corridor, protected by a steel door with an electronic lock. But Hannah had observed Thomas typing the password several times. It was an 8-digit sequence that he seemed to type automatically. 15081987. Probably an important date, perhaps his birthday or the anniversary of some significant event. To her surprise, the password worked on the first attempt. Thomas's office was a sanctuary of obsessive organization, each book perfectly aligned on the shelves, each paper in its proper place, each object positioned with geometric precision. It was the office of a man who controlled every aspect of his own life and the lives of others. Hannah went directly to the computer. The screen requested a password, but she tried the same numerical sequence. Again, it worked. Thomas was intelligent in many things, but his compulsion for control made him predictable in others. The computer files were organized in folders with seemingly innocent names. Investments, properties, personal. But when Hannah opened the personal folder, she found subfolders with female names: Rachel, Camilla, Claire, and, to her horror, Hannah. Her own folder had been created the day after the wedding and already contained dozens of files. Photos of her sleeping, detailed medical reports, psychological analyses based on her conversations with Thomas, and even architectural plans showing modifications he intended to make to her room. Bars on the windows, special locks, more sophisticated monitoring systems. He was planning to transform her room into a literal prison. With her heart beating rapidly, Hannah opened Claire's folder. She found hundreds of files, photos, videos, audio recordings, medical reports, intercepted correspondence. Thomas had obsessively documented every moment of Claire's life, like a scientist studying a specimen in a laboratory, and at the end of the folder there was a subfolder called Gabriel. Hannah opened it with trembling hands. The files showed the progression of Claire's pregnancy, the birth of the baby, the first months of life. But they also contained falsified medical reports, prescriptions for dangerous medications administered to the child, and correspondence with professionals who had been bribed to alter reports. Thomas had systematically poisoned his own son for 3 months, disguising the murder as sudden infant death syndrome. The last file in the folder was a video. Hannah hesitated before opening it, intuiting that it would be something terrible. But she needed to know the complete truth. The video showed Claire in the baby's room, holding Gabriel in her arms and crying uncontrollably. The date indicated it had been recorded 2 days before the child's death. "He's killing you," Claire whispered to the sleeping baby. "I know he is. The medications he says are vitamins. You get weaker and weaker after taking them, but I can't stop giving them because then he'll suspect I found out." Claire looked directly at the camera, and Hannah realized she knew she was being filmed. "If anyone is watching this after I die," said Claire, "know that Thomas Blackwood murdered our son, and he will kill me too when he discovers I know the truth. Please, don't let this happen to other women." The video ended abruptly. Hannah closed the file, tears running down her face. Claire hadn't just discovered that Thomas was a murderer. She had helplessly watched as he killed their own child, knowing she would also be killed if she tried to stop him. And now, Hannah was in the same situation. She quickly copied the most important files to a flash drive she found in a drawer of the office. It was enough evidence to convict Thomas of multiple murders if she could deliver it to the proper authorities. But first, she needed to get out of there alive. When she returned to the bedroom, Thomas was still sleeping deeply. Hannah stored the documents and the flash drive at the bottom of her suitcase, between underwear, and lay down beside him, trying to control her accelerated breathing. The baby continued to move restlessly in her belly. Hannah gently caressed her belly, making a silent promise. "I will never let him hurt you," she whispered softly. "We're getting out of here tomorrow, I promise." But when the sun rose, Hannah discovered that Thomas had changed the plans. "Good morning, my love," he said, kissing her softly when she woke up. "I have a surprise for you." Hannah forced a sleepy smile. "What kind of surprise?" "We're going on a trip. A few days at a romantic inn in Aspen. I thought it would be good to get away from this house for a while." The alarm immediately sounded in Hannah's mind. Thomas had never shown interest in leaving the property with her. Why now? "That's not necessary," she said carefully. "I'm fine here." "I insist. Everything is already organized. We leave in an hour." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Hannah realized that Thomas had discovered something. Perhaps the security cameras had recorded her nighttime movements. Perhaps he had noticed that files on his computer had been accessed. Or perhaps just his predator's intuition had caught that she was planning something. Regardless of the reason, he was taking her away from the property, away from any escape route she might have planned, away from witnesses or evidence. Aspen, where he had accidentally fallen from a helicopter years before, where he probably planned for her to also suffer an accident. "Thomas," she said, trying to sound natural, "I don't think we should travel. The doctor said I need rest and the baby." "Dr. Silver will accompany us," interrupted Thomas, "to ensure that you and the baby will be fine." Dr. Silver, the man who had helped drug and kill Claire, who had falsified medical reports, who would probably help Thomas simulate another accident. Hannah understood she was cornered. If she refused the trip, Thomas would definitely know she was planning something. If she accepted, she would be walking into a trap. But perhaps there was a third option. "All right," she said, kissing him with feigned affection. "I'll get ready." "Excellent. And Hannah?" "Yes?" "Take only the essentials. We won't need much luggage." The phrase confirmed her suspicions. Thomas wasn't planning for her to return from that trip. Hannah showered and dressed calmly, but her mind was working feverishly. She needed a plan. Some way to turn the tables before it was too late. That's when she remembered the cell phone. Thomas had confiscated her old phone on the day of the wedding, claiming he would provide a new one with better security. But she had seen where he kept the old devices, in a locked drawer in his office. If she could recover the phone for a few minutes, she could send the evidence to someone. To the police, to a newspaper, to anyone who might investigate Thomas's crimes. "I forgot something in the winter garden," she said to Thomas when she came down with the small suitcase. "I'll be right back." "Martha can get it for you," he offered. But there was suspicion in his voice. "It's personal. A memento I want to take." Thomas reluctantly nodded. 5 minutes, the car is waiting." Hannah left the house as if heading toward the winter garden, but she circled around and entered through the back, reaching Thomas's office through the back door that he rarely locked during the day. She found her old phone in the drawer, still with battery. Her hands trembled as she copied the files from the flash drive to the cell phone and sent them to all the contacts she could remember: journalists, lawyers, human rights activists. It didn't matter if they would immediately believe it. What mattered was that the information was out there, beyond Thomas's control. When she finished, she erased the sending history and put the phone back in the drawer. Running to the winter garden, she picked up one of Claire's smaller watercolors, a melancholy landscape that would serve as an excuse for her delay. "I found it," she said to Thomas when she returned. "This painting reminds me that even in the darkest moments there's still beauty in the world." Thomas smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "How profound. Shall we go?" The trip to Aspen was a silent torture. Hannah seated in the back of the armored limousine, Thomas beside her in the adapted wheelchair, Dr. Silver in the front seat, casually talking about the weather and the mountains, as if they were going on a picnic, not to a murder. Hannah watched. The landscape passed by the window, each mile taking her further from safety. But she knew she had done everything she could. The evidence had been sent, spread across the internet. Even if Thomas killed her, the truth would eventually come out. "What are you thinking about?" asked Thomas, noticing her silence. "The baby," she said, caressing her belly, "hoping she'll be born healthy and happy." "She will be born," said Thomas. "I'm sure of that." But Hannah caught the ambiguity in the response. The baby would be born, but that didn't mean she would be alive to raise her. When they arrived at the inn, an isolated place high in the mountains, surrounded by dense forest, Hannah knew her suspicions were correct. It was the perfect place for an accident, far from witnesses with dangerous terrain around and owners who had probably been bought in advance. "It's beautiful," she said, pretending to admire the view. "Yes," agreed Thomas. "So beautiful that sometimes people become reckless. They get too close to the edges of the cliffs, trying to take better photos. Accidents happen." The threat was crystal clear, but Hannah was no longer afraid. She was furious. Thomas had killed at least 4 women and 1 child. He had ruined lives, destroyed families, used his wealth and power to cover up heinous crimes. And now he thought he would do the same with her. How wrong he was. "Thomas," she said, turning to face him, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" Hannah smiled, a smile he had never seen before. It wasn't submission or fear, it was pure determination. "I know exactly who you are, and the whole world will know too." Thomas's expression changed instantly. The mask of loving husband fell away, revealing the predator underneath. "Hannah, I found Claire's diary, the documents, the videos of Gabriel, everything." She stood up, facing him without fear. "And I've already sent copies to 20 different people, journalists, lawyers, police officers. Even if you kill me, even if you stage another accident, the truth will come out." Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was completely different, cold, calculating, without any pretense of humanity. "You've made a serious mistake, Hannah. The mistake was yours, for thinking I would be as easy to kill as the others." "It won't be easy," he agreed, "but it will happen anyway." And that's when the real fight for Hannah's life began. The silence that followed Hannah's words was as dense as the mountain fog that surrounded the inn. Thomas remained motionless in the wheelchair, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the air seem electrified. Dr. Silva had stopped pretending interest in the landscape and now observed the scene with clinical attention, as if watching a fascinating experiment. "You shouldn't have done that, Hannah," Thomas finally said, his voice laden with a sadness she didn't expect to hear. "Now there's no going back." "No going back from what? From you killing me like you killed the others? From you discovering that I'm not who you think I am?" Hannah frowned. There was something different in Thomas's tone, a vulnerability that contrasted with the predatory coldness of moments before. "Thomas," said Dr. Silva softly, "you're confusing yourself again. Remember what we talked about regarding these episodes?" "Episodes?" Hannah looked between the 2 men, a new suspicion beginning to form in her mind. Thomas ran his hands through his hair, as if trying to organize confused thoughts. "I sometimes don't remember things clearly. The boundaries become hazy." "It's normal," said the doctor, approaching with a syringe he discreetly took from his pocket. "Your condition requires constant medication to maintain stability." "What condition?" asked Hannah, but something in Dr. Silva's expression made her instinctively back away. "Dissociative identity disorder," explained the doctor calmly. "Thomas suffered severe trauma in childhood. He developed multiple personalities as a defense mechanism. One of them is problematic." Thomas looked at Hannah with eyes that suddenly seemed completely different, younger, more frightened, more human. "Hannah, I need you to understand something. I didn't kill these women, not consciously. There is another person inside me, someone who emerges when I'm under a lot of stress or when he stops taking the medication," completed Dr. Silva, positioning himself behind Thomas's wheelchair. "That's why I need to administer this dose now, to protect all of us." But Hannah had noticed something the doctor didn't perceive. Thomas had moved in the wheelchair in a way she recognized. He was pretending again, and there was genuine terror in his eyes, not of himself but of Dr. Silva. "Wait," said Hannah, interposing herself between the doctor and Thomas. "What medication is that?" "A mood stabilizer, nothing harmful." "May I see the syringe?" Dr. Silver hesitated for a fraction of a second, time enough for Hannah to realize he was lying. "Hannah, please step aside. Thomas can become violent if he doesn't receive the medication. Or maybe he becomes violent if he receives it." The phrase fell like a bomb between them. Dr. Silver stopped pretending medical concern and showed a cold expression that Hannah had seen before, in Thomas's eyes when he assumed his most dangerous personality. "You are very perceptive," said the doctor slowly. "Unfortunately, that will make things more complicated." "Hannah," whispered Thomas, his voice trembling but urgent, "listen carefully. Dr. Silver is not who he claims to be. He has been drugging me for years with substances that alter my personality, that make me do terrible things." "Fantasies," said the doctor, but Hannah noticed how his hand tightened on the Syringe. Thomas always invents elaborate theories to justify his homicidal impulses. "Then explain something to me," said Hannah, turning to face Dr. Silver. "If Thomas has dissociative disorder, why do all his violent personalities emerge only when you're around? Why do the deaths always happen after your medical visits?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Because continued Hannah, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together in her mind, you're not a doctor treating a patient, you're the real murderer, and Thomas is your drugged puppet." Dr. Silver laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the inn-suite. "Very intelligent, really very intelligent. It's a shame you have to die for it." "Why?" asked Hannah, buying time while trying to think of a way to escape. "Why do this?" "Money, initially," said the doctor, putting away the syringe and taking a pistol from his jacket. "Thomas is an incredibly rich man, but also incredibly lonely. It was easy to convince him he needed psychological treatment after the first helicopter accident, which, by the way, was real. He really did suffer mild head trauma. So you took advantage of his vulnerability. I took advantage and amplified it. Some well-dosed drugs, suggestion therapy, hypnosis. It was surprisingly simple to program him to do what I wanted. And what I wanted was access to the Blackwood family fortune." Thomas tried to stand up from the wheelchair, but staggered as if under the effect of sedatives. "Hannah, run, he's going to kill you too." "Silence," ordered Dr. Silver, pointing the gun at Thomas. "You've served your purpose. 3 dead wives, 3 substantial life insurance policies divided between me and you, although you never knew about that. And now this 4th wife, who conveniently discovered enough evidence to completely incriminate you." "You forged the evidence," realized Hannah. "Some of it. Others were the result of Thomas's actions under my influence. He really did kill Claire and the others, you know. He just wasn't conscious when he did it. The drugs I administer create a trance state where he obeys post-hypnotic commands without forming conscious memories." Hannah felt nausea rising in her throat. "And Claire's baby? Gabriel?" "Ah yes, little Gabriel." Dr. Silver smiled cruelly. It was also Thomas who administered the poisons, although he believed he was giving vitamins. It was touching to see him cry over his dead son's crib with no idea he had been the perpetrator himself. "You're a monster," whispered Hannah. "I'm a businessman. And you, my dear, have become a very serious business problem." He gestured with the gun. "Let's take a walk to the cliff. Unfortunately, you'll suffer a tragic accident while admiring the view. Thomas, in despair over the loss of his pregnant wife, will finally succumb to remorse and throw himself off too. And you'll inherit everything. As the family's only friend and confidant, and having documents that prove Thomas's mental instability, yes, it's an elegant plan, don't you think?" Hannah looked at Thomas, who was clearly fighting against the effects of the drugs in his system. His eyes were glazed, but she could see the real person behind the chemical fog. A tormented man, manipulated, used as a weapon for years. "Thomas," she said softly, "can you hear me?" "The real Thomas?" I can," he murmured, forcing the words. "Remember when we met at the hospital, when you said I had eyes that don't lie? I remember. Remember the first night in the library, when you were honest with me about Claire?" Yes. His voice was becoming clearer, as if the genuine memories were combating the effects of the drugs. "That was you, the real man, not the terrible things he made you do." Hannah pointed to Dr. Silver. "You're not a murderer, Thomas, you're a victim." "Enough group therapy," interrupted the doctor. "Let's go." But something had changed in Thomas. He stood up from the wheelchair with a more coordinated movement, and Hannah saw a different gleam. In his eyes, determination, anger, lucidity. "No," said Thomas, his voice gaining strength. "I won't let you hurt her." "You'll do exactly what I tell you to, as you've always done," said Dr. Silver, taking a second syringe from his pocket. "A double dose should resolve your resistance." But Thomas was faster. He grabbed a heavy flower, vase from the table beside the wheelchair, and threw it at the doctor's armed arm. The pistol fired at the ceiling, making a shower of plaster fall on everyone. "Run, Hannah," shouted Thomas, jumping on Dr. Silver. Hannah didn't need a second order. She ran to the suite door, but it was locked from the outside. She desperately banged on the wood, screaming for help, but the inn was isolated and apparently empty. Probably all the staff had been dismissed or bribed. Behind her, Thomas and Dr. Silver fought for control of the gun. The doctor was older, but Thomas was still under the effect of sedatives that affected his coordination. The fight was brutal and uneven. "Hannah," gasped Thomas as he tried to hold the doctor's wrist. In my suitcase, emergency phone." Hannah ran to Thomas's suitcase and found a satellite phone, equipment that explained how he always managed to maintain contact with the outside world, even in isolated locations. She dialed 911 with trembling fingers, but before she could speak, Dr. Silver managed to free himself from Thomas with a blow to the head. The businessman collapsed on the floor, blood flowing from a cut on his forehead. "Hang up that phone," ordered the doctor, pointing the gun at Hannah again. "It's too late," she said, keeping the call active. "The police already know where we are." It was a lie. She hadn't even managed to speak with the operator, but it worked. Dr. Silver became visibly nervous. "Then we'll have to accelerate the schedule," he said. "Let's go to the cliff now. You're going to jump and Thomas will follow." "Are you in a few minutes?" "I won't." "Yes, you will, because if you don't, I'll torture Thomas in front of you until he begs me to kill him." Hannah looked at Thomas lying on the floor, moaning softly as he tried to regain consciousness. The man she had learned to love was there, defenseless, in the hands of a psychopath. But then she remembered something. The evidence she had sent the night before. Even if she died there, the truth about Dr. Silver would eventually come out. Thomas would be recognized as a victim, not as a villain. "All right," she said. "I'll go with you." Dr. Silver smiled triumphantly. "I knew you would be reasonable." They left the suite, Hannah walking in front with the gun pointed at her back. The cliff was just 50 meters from the inn, a dramatic precipice that offered a spectacular view of the mountains and a deadly fall of more than 100 meters. "Stop here," ordered the doctor when they reached the edge of the precipice. Hannah stopped, feeling the cold mountain wind whip her hair. The baby moved restlessly in her belly, as if sensing the imminent danger. "Any last words?" asked Dr. Silver, clearly enjoying the moment. "Yes," said Hannah, turning to face him. "You made a mistake." "Which one?" "You assumed I would be as easy to kill as the others." Dr. Silver frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this." Hannah pointed behind the doctor, where Thomas was silently approaching, a thick tree branch in his hands. He had managed to get out of the suite and follow them, keeping hidden among the trees until he was close enough. Dr. Silver instinctively turned, and Hannah took advantage of the distraction to push him with all the strength she had. The doctor stumbled, lost his balance, and for a terrible moment stood at the edge of the cliff, his arms frantically waving to regain stability. "Thomas," he shouted, "help me. Remember what we talked about regarding obedience." For an instant, Hannah saw Thomas hesitate, as if post-hypnotic commands still had power over him. But then he looked at her, pregnant and in danger, and any residual programming dissolved. "No," Thomas said simply. Dr. Silver fell. The doctor's scream echoed through the mountains for several seconds before being muffled by the sound of impact at the bottom of the ravine. Thomas ran to Hannah, who had collapsed on her knees in the grass, trembling uncontrollably. "It's over," he whispered, hugging her tightly. "It's over." But Hannah knew it wasn't over yet. She began to feel contractions. "Thomas," she said, grabbing his arm, "I think the baby is coming." The next few hours were a blur of pain, fear, and urgency. Thomas carried Hannah back to the inn and used the satellite phone to call an ambulance. But the inn was in a mountainous region with difficult access, and the rescue helicopter would take at least an hour to arrive. "Everything will be fine," said Thomas, holding her hand as the contractions intensified. "You're strong, the strongest I've ever known." "Thomas," said Hannah between waves of pain, "I need you to know. I love you. The real Thomas, not the person Dr. Silver forced you to be." "I love you too," he responded, tears running down his face, "and I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what was done to you. To all of them. It wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was. If I had been stronger, more resistant—" "Thomas," Hannah squeezed his hand hard, "you were the victim of a sophisticated predator who used science and medicine to manipulate you. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The helicopter finally arrived when Hannah was in advanced labor. The paramedics stabilized her and transported her to the nearest hospital, Thomas by her side the whole time. Sophia was born at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in January, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces, small, but perfectly healthy. When they placed her in Hannah's arms, she knew that all the pain, all the terror, all the suffering had been worth it. "She's perfect," whispered Thomas, gently touching the baby's small hand. "She's ours," said Hannah, "our family." The months that followed were of healing and reconstruction. The police investigation confirmed everything Hannah had discovered. Dr. Silver had been the real murderer, using Thomas as a weapon through psychological manipulation and drugs. The files found on Thomas's computer, combined with the evidence Hannah had sent, painted a complete picture of the conspiracy. Thomas was formally cleared of all crimes, but that didn't ease his guilt. He began intensive therapy with psychologists specialized in trauma and mind control, determined to completely free himself from the programming he had suffered. Hannah also underwent therapy, processing not just what she had experienced with Thomas, but all the trauma of her previous life, the abandonment, the poverty, the feeling of having no value. For the first time, she began to understand that she deserved love, respect, and happiness. The Blackwood mansion was sold. Thomas said he couldn't live there anymore, that the place held too many painful memories. With the money from the sale and part of the fortune he had legitimately inherited from his family, they bought a smaller house in a coastal town, far from the mountains and the shadows of the past. It was there, on a March morning, that Thomas asked the question Hannah always knew would come. They were on the porch watching Sophia play in the garden. She had recently started crawling and explored the world with infinite curiosity. The sea shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in years both felt genuinely at peace. "Hannah," said Thomas, kneeling beside the chair where she was seated. "Thomas, what are you doing?" He took a small velvet box from his pocket. "I'm asking you to marry me. For real this time." Hannah laughed, tears of happiness springing to her eyes. "We're already married, remember?" That marriage was a business contract, a transaction between strangers. Thomas opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth or power. "I want to marry you because I love you, because you saved me, because I can't imagine a life without you and Sophia." Hannah extended her hand, allowing him to place the ring on her finger. "Yes," she said. "Forever, yes." The second wedding took place on the beach, in a small ceremony with just a few close friends, people they had met during therapy, neighbors who had become chosen family, professionals who had helped them on the journey of healing. This time there were no contracts or conditions, just two people who had been through the worst moments of life and chosen to build something beautiful together. "I, Hannah, take you, Thomas," she said, when it was her turn for the vows, "not just in the good moments, but especially in the difficult ones. I promise to be by your side as we heal, as we grow, as we become the best versions of ourselves. I, Thomas, take you, Hannah, he responded, and I promise never to let anyone hurt us again. I promise to protect our family, our happiness, our love, and I promise that when you look at me, you will always see the man who chooses to love you every day, not the man who was forced to do terrible things. When they kissed to seal their vows, Hannah felt something she had never experienced before: absolute security. Not the false security of wealth or power, but the genuine security of being completely known and completely loved. Sophia took her first steps on her first birthday. Hannah was in the kitchen preparing the cake when she heard Thomas shout with emotion from the living room, "Hannah, come quick, she's walking!" Hannah ran to the living room and found Sophia in the middle of the room, walking wobbly but determined toward Thomas's outstretched arms. When the little one finally reached her father and he picked her up, both parents were crying with joy. "Look what our girl can do," said Thomas, spinning Sophia in the air as she laughed delightedly. "Our brave girl," agreed Hannah, embracing them both. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Hannah and Thomas sat on the porch watching the waves break on the beach. It was a warm summer night, and the sound of the sea was hypnotically relaxing. "What are you thinking about?" asked Thomas, noticing she was quiet. "About how we got here," said Hannah. "About how two such broken people managed to build something so beautiful. Do you think it was worth it? All the suffering, all the fear?" Hannah considered the question carefully. "You know, I used to think that life was about avoiding pain, about protecting yourself from getting hurt. But now I realize that life is about going through the pain and coming out stronger on the other side." "And do you feel stronger?" "I feel whole," she said. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete." Thomas took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Me too. You taught me that it's possible to love without possessing. That true protection means giving freedom, not taking it away. And you taught me that I deserve to be loved, that I don't need to accept crumbs of affection or settle for men who abandon me." They were silent for a moment, just appreciating the peace of the moment. "Thomas," said Hannah finally, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned to look at her, momentary concern crossing his face. "What is it?" Hannah smiled. "I'm pregnant again." Thomas's expression passed through surprise, joy, concern, and finally pure happiness. "Are you sure?" "I confirmed it at the doctor's today. 8 weeks." Thomas took her in his arms and spun her, both laughing like teenagers. "Another baby," he said, amazed. "Our family is growing. Are you happy?" "I'm ecstatic. Sophia is going to have a little brother or sister. And you're not worried with everything that happened before?" Thomas stopped spinning and carefully set her on the ground. "Hannah, what happened before has nothing to do with us. That was the result of manipulation and sickness. This is the result of love and conscious choice." He gently caressed her face. "We are not the same people who met at that hospital 2 years ago. We have healed, grown, learned. And now we are able to offer our children something neither of us had in childhood, a truly safe and loving home." Hannah kissed him softly. "I love you so much." "I love you too, and I love the life we've built together." 2 years later, on a sunny spring morning, Hannah was in the garden watching Sophia play with her younger brother Gabriel, named in honor of the first Gabriel, as a way to honor his memory and give new meaning to the pain. Thomas had gone out to get bread at the local bakery, something he did every morning, a simple routine, but one that symbolized how their lives had become normal and healthy. When he returned, he found Hannah sitting on the grass, the 2 children sleeping in her lap after playing to exhaustion. "Looks like someone tired out the little ones," he said, sitting beside her. "They have so much energy," said Hannah, caressing Sophia's hair. "Sometimes I wonder where we find the strength to keep up with them." "From love," said Thomas simply. "When you truly love, you find strength you didn't know you had." Hannah looked at him, the man who had begun as a stranger offering financial salvation and had become her life companion, her best friend, the father of her children. He still had difficult moments, occasional nightmares about the past, days when the guilt returned strongly. But he had learned to deal with these moments in a healthy way, with therapy, open communication, and the unconditional support of his family. "Thomas," she said, "do you remember what you told me that first night in the library? About not being able to love without destroying?" He nodded. "I remember. Look around. Look at our family, our life, our happiness. You learned. We learned." Thomas looked at the sleeping children, at the woman he loved, at the simple but cozy house they had transformed into a home. For the first time since he could remember, he didn't feel afraid of the future. "You know what's most amazing?" he said. "For years I thought my destiny was to destroy everything I touched, that I was condemned to repeat destructive patterns forever. But you showed me it's possible to break cycles, rewrite stories, choose a different path." "We showed each other that," corrected Hannah. "I was lost too when we met. I also believed I didn't deserve happiness." "And now?" Hannah smiled, watching. Her children sleep peacefully in her arms. "Now I know we deserve all this and much more. We deserve love, peace, joy. We deserve second chances." "And third, and fourth, and as many as necessary," added Thomas. "Exactly." They sat there on the grass until the children woke up, planning in low voices the future they wanted to build together. More children, perhaps. A family trip when Gabriel got older. A renewal of wedding vows on their 5th anniversary. Simple plans, normal dreams, common happiness. And for two people who had spent so much time lost in darkness, that luminous normality was the greatest miracle of all. Because sometimes the greatest adventure of life isn't finding something extraordinary, but discovering that the ordinary can be magical when shared with those you love. And Hannah and Thomas had finally found their magic.